So, good morning, everyone. In my case, good morning. In your case, good evening, or wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all doing well. Uh, okay to go ahead and start, Lawrence?
Yep.
Alrighty. So, let's begin with a quick invocation. Vidutakapana jala gambirudara murtaye namaha samantabhadraya samantasparanatishe nabhavo nibhavo sindhu cherunapi shashvataha Nanityanapi nityastvam madhyaya namostute. Tsejinkiki bezagi dalati mambo razane kanda tanjishalo tobai lojo babe nama tseldesu. Omenjagi ingi podrane tuzen sangi kungi gomoni. Rasan chogongo tunze batsawe la mishabla suwadem. Okay, great to see you all. I'm Gonde looks very cozy there. Here we've just had about 10, about rather 25 centimeters of snow, and right now it's almost minus 20 degrees. So winter is upon us. Uh, the so it's a good time to be indoors and to do a little Dharma together. Let me just begin by asking whether anyone has questions. Are there any questions? You can put them in the chat. I didn't get a chance to check our online documents, uh, but let me know if somehow you have a question. You can also just unmute yourself if you're online, if you want to ask a question. Any question at all of what we've done so far. Any question at all.
Yes.
Nico.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Nice. Okay, so I think last time or the second time you talked about the river as a metaphor for the life or for reincarnation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like if the river is the metaphor, then the water is the soul or something that flows. But that would mean there has to be something that passes on, huh?
So, yes. So there is a continuity,
Yeah.
but continuity doesn't mean, so this is actually, I was just thinking about this morning because it's really it's interesting how, on the one hand, we talk about impermanence, right? And actually, interestingly, Buddhist philosophers kind of came up with an idea that's very similar to what scientists later discovered, which is that actually all things are in constant flux. So by the time, we've gotten to so far, like the second turning of the wheel, right? And so historically, in Western terms, we talk about that being starting around the year zero-ish, not long after that. And even before that, but then especially Buddhists become especially clear about the idea of what they call the philosophy of momentariness, where everything is in flux all the time. And actually, like scientifically, yes, every material thing that we see, is if we accept that, material there's matter, it's all, I mean, even if we don't, if we just talk about energy or whatever, everything is in constant flux. But that doesn't, in our conceptual, our like perceptual system is not really designed or it hasn't evolved to see flux. And it makes some sense. If we're just trying to survive, then the fact that, the apple that I'm picking from the tree is actually constantly changing is not really that relevant to me just eating the apple, right? So I don't really need to perceive that. So is the fact that the apple looks like it's not changing, is that a total illusion? And actually, it's not a total illusion because within change, there can still be continuity. And sometimes that continuity has to do with, and this is where I'm going to use a kind of contemporary modern idea that makes it easier to understand because it gets quite technical in the Buddhist context. It's pretty technical scientifically too, but I think it's easier to talk about what's called a system. So in the Buddhist world, we talk about this as a causal complex. But a system is something that can have coherence over time, even though all of its elements are constantly changing. And the system, so let's think about like, you know, we have tornadoes here in the US. Have you seen like a picture of a tornado? Maybe you've watched one of the movies like Twister or whatever, right? So, a thing about a system, a tornado is a really interesting example of a system where all of the different elements of the system are interacting and it can do things. The system can do things that the individual elements can't do. So that's part of what we mean when we use the word system. So, like the air molecules in a tornado can't pick up a car and throw it 100 meters, but a tornado can do that because the elements are interacting in a certain way that produces those capacities. But there isn't a tornado separate from the elements. Right? The tornado is nothing other than those air molecules. And those air molecules are constantly changing every moment, but they're in a causal flow that the system is sustaining, right? So that's very similar to, but what's different about a tornado is it's not what we call an adaptive system, which means that it doesn't like it can't really respond to its environment very well, so it falls apart easily once the conditions change, like temperature and moisture and stuff. But the human system, and this is true of biological systems in general, we are like a tornado in the sense that there's just a bunch of different elements, right? This is the Buddhist view, and we call those elements dharmas, remember? Or we can talk about the five aggregates. It's a way of summarizing all of the different elements. And they're interacting, and there is a kind of system there, which we can call the person, but it's not like something separate than those components. But those components on their own, they can't even actually really exist on their own. They can only exist when they're working together in a system. Like if we think about it in terms of, our organs, like your brain and your liver and so on, can only exist with each other, right? They can't exist on their own. But that doesn't mean that they're one thing. Clearly, they're separate things, but they're working together to create this kind of ongoing system. So you can have a bunch of these elements constantly changing, but there's a kind of integrity to the system, a coherence to the system so that it can keep going over time with the right conditions. And a key part of the right conditions, and here's the important thing, Nico, is that the conditions for the continuation of this bunch of stuff, mental and physical elements, as a samsaric being, right? As a sentient being in samsara, the main condition for that is karma. But karma that's being produced by klesha, especially confusion. So that's why we get this difference in the two kinds of nirvana, because one version of nirvana is we're just going to let the system run out. We're going to take away the conditions, which are karma and klesha, and then it'll eventually just stop. Right? The system won't, this stuff won't hang together anymore. And then the new version of it is, well, actually, instead of like just stopping, we want to change the system. We want to transform it. And that's where we get this new version of nirvana. And for us to be able to transform it, one thing that has to be the case is that all of these different elements are not fixed in their identity. It's possible for them to be radically changed. Like normally we'd say you can't make an orange tree from an apple seed. If we are saying that those identities are objectively real. But if we say there's a way in which actually none of that is fixed, that we can reconfigure everything, then it's possible to take these elements and, in a sense, make a different system out of them, which is a Buddha. So the new kind of nirvana is we're going to radically transform the system, right? Does that make sense? So to get back to your question, when we talk about like the flow, there is a flow, but the flow isn't something other than each moment, this stuff changing moment by moment by moment. Just like the flow of a river is a bunch of, water molecules and lots of other stuff too, probably. And that's actually what's good about the river is like you can have stuff in the river. So part of the idea here also is that whatever's causing the dysfunctional system, we can get rid of that stuff and still have a system, so to speak. Just like the river can be polluted and you can get rid of the pollution and that doesn't get rid of the river. So it's possible to change, it's possible to remove the pollutants, so to speak, to radically change the system. And there's continuity, but that doesn't mean there's one thing that's continuous, right? Because the system is just all of those elements. It's not a separate single thing. I see you doubting. You're having a doubt. What's your doubt? What, go ahead. You can, yeah.
Uh, yeah, no, I think it's just difficult to understand. I think it's not really doubt, but I think it's just very difficult to fully understand this.
Yeah, so I think if you think about phenomena like a tornado, maybe
Tornado I
that's,
like much more than the river,
yeah,
so
yeah. But the problem with the tornado is it doesn't. So what's interesting about this, and even a river is not a good example. A really good example is like a living cell or a tree, right? A tree or a beautiful rose. It's made out of a whole bunch of different molecules with different functions. That make up cells, and even those cells can have different functions in the plant that makes up the rose, right? So so the rose, we say, oh, there's one thing that's a rose, but it's really not one thing, right? It's a whole bunch of different things interacting, but it's that the system is the interaction. So there's change, constant change, but there's a kind of stability within the change. So the rose can last for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and it's able to it can adapt itself to when there's light or no light. It can adapt itself a little bit to temperature, close up when it gets too cold, right? And that's not because there's nobody like, there's no rose intelligence, there's no like little being inside the rose, like a little elf, like say, okay, close up everything now. Nobody's in charge, right? There's no like rose elf running the rose. But all of that stuff together, in a sense, is able to do that, even though it's all changing. So this is the challenge of seeing ourselves like that. We're a system. And we're actually a system, and part of the idea here is we're a system inside of other systems, like social systems, like the world itself. And we're constantly changing, but there's this continuity. You can think of it as like the causes, how the causes running the system keep it going. And then you can change. The point is, the idea is you can radically change. Just like could you turn or tornado into something beneficial in some fashion, right? Can you radically alter it? You can't really do that with tornadoes, but you can do that with sentient beings. It is not always straightforward, so, but it's very good to ask questions and think about it, and then we can talk about it again. So this is our last time today, by the way, for this kind of introductory series, but maybe we can find another time periodically, like once a month or something, to have a little question and answer just to sort of talk about stuff. Uh, Okay, if any other questions before we go on? So that was a great question from Nico. Thank you, Nico. Yes,
Yeah,
do I have you have a question, Lawrence?
yeah, I would have a follow-up question to that. So if I
Yeah.
understand correctly, it would be right to say that after a certain amount of reincarnations, there would be nothing left of the first incarnation that is the same. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. Actually, strictly speaking, there's never anything left that's the same, even from one reincarnation to the other. In in the sense, so here's another metaphor. If you take a flame on a candle and then you light another candle as you put out the flame, is this new flame the same as the one that went out or different?
Yeah, it's a different flame, but I guess it
But
is
it's
flame.
but it's caused by the previous flame. So that's the connection, but it's not the same. It would be a mistake to say it's the same, but it's connected. Like if you do that with two candles and two new flames, you'd say these two flames, the two new flames are different. We'd all agree. And we'd say, well, but they're not, they're different, but they're connected to those previous candles, right? So that continuity, that's basically a kind of causal continuity. That's a good way to understand what's going on in that case. Does that make sense? Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, the biggest challenge to this, I think, is our intuition that we are one person, right? And of course, when you look at a tornado, it's like, yeah, it's one thing, but it's really a bunch of air molecules working together. And if it were just one thing, it's a thing that's one, you could take all the air molecules away and you should still have a tornado, right? Like this cup, we say is one thing, but if it's a thing that's separate from all of this stuff that makes it up, then we should take the stuff away and we still have a cup. I like to say that makes it very easy to travel with cups. You can have as many cups as you want in your suitcase because look, they don't take up any space. Right? It doesn't make sense. So the idea that there's like this is a one system, if you like, but there isn't like one, controller in there. Just like there's no little rose elf running the rose, there's no like little Nico inside of Nico's head running Nico, right? There's, I'm quite sure there isn't one. There isn't. Nico's not sure, but I am. There's no little John Dunne inside there. Like if we could, he's sitting in his pilot seat, driving me around. That's not how it works. The system altogether is doing it. So there is a kind of unity to the system, right? So in that sense, there's a kind of, you could say there's one system, but that's a little bit of an illusion because it's like one in many and many in one. So it's a sort of paradox when we think of it in those terms. And the main lesson is to move away from a kind of simplistic idea that, there's kind of somebody who's in charge of this system. Just like there isn't somebody in charge of the rose, making the rose do what it does as a biological system. There's nothing in this biological system that is in charge. But that doesn't mean it can't work. Obviously, I'm not like suddenly incoherent. Like, oh, sorry, myself took a vacation for a moment there, and I stopped being coherent. Okay, so that's the basic intuition from early Buddhism, which is really key. And, you can experience this sometimes when we sort of are in certain kinds of meditation practices, especially some we'll talk about a little bit today, where you sort of let go of trying to be, having a perspective on the world. Uh, and there are kinds of practices that can help us to see, like, oh, we are fully present. We can say, even I am present. I is singular, so it can be a little confusing. Or you can just say, this presence is happening, consciousness is happening, without having there to be like, oh, one person who is conscious, the true me in there somewhere in the driver's seat, right? And that for sometimes can be a little bit like, whoa, what's going on? Like you can feel almost, they can almost feel disturbing sometimes, but in another way, it's quite liberating because it also means that things can change. And that's the emphasis then on the second turning of the wheel. So you could say the real primary lesson of the first turning of the wheel is the idea that, just like there's a rose elf running the rose, the idea that there's a person running you, like there's somebody, the real you in the driver's seat somewhere, that's an illusion. And trying to make that illusory controller happy will never succeed because it doesn't exist. You can't make a non-existent being happy. And then the inside of the second, and that's a very profound insight. And like experiencing that is very, is really a profound experience. And then the kind of inside of the second turning of the wheel is that radical change is possible. Nothing is fixed in its identity, not just this stuff, but even the whole world is empty of any kind of intrinsic existence, empty of, like the cup is empty of really being a cup. But at the same time, we say whatever is what we when we say empty, what we also mean is interdependent. We're not saying there's nothing. We're saying that what's happening here is this interdependent process, not just some single thing, but an interdependent process that's also interdependent with us as those perceiving it. So emptiness means interdependence. Interdependence requires emptiness. Okay, that's the second turning of the wheel. And then, okay, so does that make sense so far? Maybe it doesn't, but I guess we'll I guess we'll move on anyway, and we'll have more questions later. Okay, so then we get to the third turning of the wheel. And remember, these are all said to have been teachings that were given traditionally. We say these are teachings that were given by the Buddha during his lifetime, but that historically they become kind of manifest in the world at a later point. So the third turning consists of teachings that are maybe a century or two later than the perfection of wisdom texts that are for the second turning of the wheel, the texts about emptiness and interdependence, like the Heart Sutra. And then a little while after that, we get a number of different texts that are literary texts, right? Which are kind of visionary texts that are teaching a different that are in a sense building on each of these builds on the other. The second turning only makes sense in relation to the first turning. First turning is really, we can say, the main teaching is selflessness. That only makes without that teaching, you can't really understand what emptiness means in the second turning, emptiness and interdependence. And in the third turning, now what we're going to do is actually we're going to turn, especially in a sense, our attention to experience itself. What is the nature of experience itself? And in a sense, you could say, Nico, it's kind of like trying to answer in some ways your question. Because when we say, so there are a couple of different things. What is it? So first of all, what does it mean to experience emptiness? That's one question. Another question is, if we can talk in some sense of continuity, what's the continuity between a Buddha and an ordinary being, right? Because the idea is, of course, all Buddhas were once ordinary beings. So how do we get from being, so what's the continuity? That's a key question. Those two key questions then also point to a another very important issue as well. What do we really mean by emptiness? Okay, what's happening when what in other words, do we when we ask those other two questions, what's it like to experience emptiness? What does it mean to what is the continuity between an ordinary being and a Buddha? Does that mean we have to slightly revise the way we understand emptiness? Okay, so those are kind of three issues. And all of these lead to a kind of view. And so I'm just going to jump to the end here so that we at least say it, even if we can't totally unpack it. That eventually leads to a kind of view, which is the view that is the main view and then also kind of practice that we have in Gomde's tradition. So in the Indian context, that view and practice is called Mahamudra, the Great Seal. That's the one that's the most kind of a common way of talking about it. A less common way, but that becomes very important in Tibet, is Dzogchen, the Great Perfection. And these, in the tradition of Gomde, is a combination of those two traditions, the Great Seal and the Great Perfection. And there are some important differences between them, but for our purposes, we don't need to really focus on the differences. We can just treat them as both of them as essentially just different versions in a way, different approaches to more or less the same path and the same view. And the key way of understanding this view, all right, to kind of bring it all together, is that what it means to be experiencing emptiness, of course, is to be experiencing the ultimate nature of reality. But when you're doing that, you're not just experiencing emptiness, you're also experiencing, you're experiencing. Experiencing is happening, so to speak. And the way we talk about that is to be in the state of realizing the ultimate nature of reality is to be not just knowing emptiness, but also to be, is not just emptiness, but also luminosity or cognizance. So we'll use the word luminosity, but Eric Pemakunzang likes the word cognizance. So this is a word in Tibetan that literally, it comes from a Sanskrit word that literally means light. Okay? But it's a metaphor. For the most part, it's a metaphor. So I'm jumping to the end because I just want to make sure we say it here, and then we're going to come back and kind of talk about this. And that when we're doing that, then the idea here also is that what we're experiencing also at that time is we're experiencing what is the same between what is the continuity between an ordinary being and a Buddha. And the way we talk about that is Buddha nature. So the experience of Mahamudra, for example, the Great Seal, is what that means in Sanskrit. That experience is the experience of a Buddha. And what we're experiencing there is the nature of our own minds, which is in the end also already Buddha. And then finally, the characteristic of what that experience is like, the kind of emptiness that we're talking about when we're having that kind of experience, is luminous, non-dual awareness. Okay? So now what I've done is I've given you the end of endpoint because I was seeing how much time is left and hopefully haven't confused you too much. But so that's the end point there that where we end up in our tradition is mom is the nature what it means to know the ultimate nature of reality is to know the nature of your own mind as actually already awakened, non-dual, luminous emptiness. Okay? Okay, we can hang up now. We can stop the meeting. It's all done. All right, so let's step back from that and say, let me give you a few more kind of terms, and then we're going to try to get into some details as much as we can in the remaining time. So part of what the third turning of the wheel is teaching, therefore, is those three things. It's teaching Buddha nature. What is Buddha nature? It's asking us to say a slightly different version of what is reality. It's pointing us to the idea that reality, when we're really inquiring into reality, we're inquiring into the nature of our own mind. Or you can say into the nature of mind, rather our own, just into the nature of mind or the nature of consciousness. That'll be clear. And when we investigate it, just like when we did with Nagarjuna, we try to find essences in things and we come up with empty of essence. We still have that idea, but now we have an even subtler idea, which is that we discover that the nature of our of consciousness itself, even though it seems like it has what we call dualism, whereas like there's a world out there and consciousness in here, or a world out there and a perceiver in here, that dualism is false. And yet, consciousness, and it's hard to say without being misleading, but consciousness or experiencing doesn't is it's not like to know the ultimate nature of things, to see what's false, to see that things are empty of a fixed identity, doesn't mean you become unconscious. So what in a sense is left? After we negate everything that is an illusion, what's left? Part of what's left is just consciousness itself, which we can describe as luminosity. Okay? So this luminous, non-dual, meaning it doesn't have that structure inside, outside. That structure is an illusion. Uh, you can't specify what your experience is. You can't put your finger on its true identity. So it's also empty in that way. And yet, experience is happening. And this is what is the continuity. This is your own Buddha nature, your own innate wisdom. And it's a very part of what's really important about that idea is that this is not something you have to make. You don't have to like fabricate your Buddhahood. It's already present. It's actually present, fully present in every moment. So, in a sense, Buddhahood is not a matter of like producing something. It's more like a matter of getting out of the way and allowing it to manifest. So that's going to be that attitude of what's called the third turning of the wheel with those three aspects to it. That attitude is really one that becomes important for the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition, but it's also what really is at the root of the Chan tradition in China, which later becomes the Zen tradition in Japan, or the Seon tradition in Korea. Very similar, going back to that third turning. So one of the ways we can talk about this is, first of all, what is it like to experience emptiness, right? What does it mean to experience emptiness? So in Nagarjuna's version of emptiness, we'd take something like our cup and we'd say, okay, what's the cup really? Can we specify what it is? Every time we try to talk about it, we end up talking about something else, right? We can't find the cup itself. Say, well, the cup is really, a handle on the top and the bottom and so on. But that's now we're talking about something other than the cup. Or it's really a bunch of atoms. Now we're not talking about the cup, we're talking about atoms. And we say, well, what's an atom really? Oh, it's a, electron, let's say it's carbon, hydrocarbon atoms, it's like an electron and a proton and a neutron for hydrogen. It's like, okay, well, what's an electron? Well, electron is, a subatomic particle with charge whose position and speed cannot be and velocity can't be simultaneously specified from at least experimentally. It's like, well, what are we talking about now? Every time we try to specify what it is, we end up with something else. So then, if you actually focus in on that experience, the non-finding of the thing, like there are many arguments we could go through, but I just want to invite you to think, to try to contemplate what would it mean to really like you look for something and it's not there, right? It's like, here it is, you're staring at it, and it just like goes whoop, right? You're staring at it, stare at it, stare at it, stare at it, stare at it, boop. What are you seeing when it goes away? Like, right? Are you seeing nothing? And there's just that first moment of like, boop. So you're aware in the non-finding. Like in that moment of not finding, of course you could say, well, I see the background or whatever, but I'm not saying that. It's like your eyes refocus on something else. Keep your focus here, and it's like, where'd it go? There's a moment of kind of being aware in the absence, so to speak. But it's not like you're not aware. It's not like you go unconscious. I drop it and you go, oh, you're like, oh, let me wake up again, right? You're conscious, but you're not knowing something. You're not knowing something. So that's the idea of being aware of emptiness without being aware of something. And part of what that means is that that kind of awareness is an awareness in which when there's no thing to know, you're still conscious. And here's a subtle thing, but that's really important. If there's no thing to know as the object, like that's what you're knowing, right? There isn't this thing to know as an object. What then happens to the sense of your subjectivity? Like being the one seeing. And we do that one more time. Like really stare at it, stare at it. You're just gonna look, just gonna watch, look at this, the space as it goes. Don't just be aware of the absence. Is there a way in which if there's nothing to see, there's also no seer? So this is the idea that this is how, in a way, uh, we move from a certain version of Nagarjuna's emptiness to another modified version, which is saying that if there's nothing to know, there's also no knower. Because the knower is defined, remember, for Nagarjuna, what it means for things to have an identity is that their identity in relation to each other. If we just want to say the cup, if we're satisfied to say, well, a cup is not a cup just in itself, it's a cup in relation to a bunch of stuff, like we were talking about before, as a system, right? Then that's fine. Then if we're good with that, that's fine. But if we need the cup to be really an absolute ultimate cup that doesn't depend on anything else, then we can't find any cup like that. Whenever we specify what something is, you always do it in relation to something else, which means if it has any identity, it has a relational identity. Likewise, our sense of being a knower, the sense of a knower is only there in relation to something being known. So when there's nothing to know, there's nothing being known, that knower also collapses. So the knower known structure is what we call a dualistic structure. And when that goes away, now we have a non-dual experience. Okay? So here's the very important claim at the level of the third turning of the wheel is that when we are knowing emptiness, like we can't find what it really is, when we're knowing emptiness, we're already in a non-dual experience. We're knowing without there being knower and known. We're still knowing. We're still aware. And that awareness we describe as luminosity. I'll explain why soon. Okay? So, what that also means is that when we are experiencing emptiness, we are not knowing something as an object. We're not a subject knowing something as an object. If what we're experiencing is the ultimate, then actually what we're in a sense what's left is just experience itself. That's what's left is experience itself. So this is a view that we call, I'll just give you this word, yogacara. Literally means practice of yoga view. And then it gets combined with Nagarjuna's view. So that's really what I'm presenting here as the third turning. So it's a view of emptiness, two kinds of emptiness. Nagarjuna's view of emptiness, like you can't specify what the thing is. And then the Yogacara view of emptiness, which is that emptiness is actually also about the collapse of that knower known distinction. And here's a key thing at this level then. That knower known distinction is actually a product of thinking there's an object there that I am knowing. It it is, in other words, I think this is a real thing that I'm knowing as a separate from me, that I'm knowing as a knower. But actually, that's an illusion. Maybe a useful illusion sometimes, but it's an illusion. It's a useful illusion if all you want to do is survive in samsara. But this is not reality. That distinction, right? That distinction is not real. It makes us think there's an objective world out there, but that's not actually the case. It also can produce a sense of like alienation or even loneliness, like, oh, I'm in here and the world is out there. I'm like stuck in here and the world is out there. That's also an illusion. So here's one way we would examine that, which is a good way to do this is with color. Okay, so let's use this again. And if you're able to see, then you can see that this is white. Everyone agrees this is white. Yeah. So, and this is especially good because I'm on a video image, right? So even just the whole thing you're seeing, where is this color happening? Is it on the screen? Or the color of my face? Or the color of the cup, right? Or this blue color, right? If we just talk about, some simple like high school physics kind of thing, we'd say there's photons at different frequencies that are being that the screen is projecting and your eye is interacting with your eye faculty is interacting with that, and it produces a signal that goes to the thalamus and moves forward and it goes into your visual cortex and then somehow moves forward and it's processing in the brain, and then eventually you see color. You don't see photons at a frequency, right? You see colors. If we accept, for the moment at least, that there are photons, that's, the stuff if we wanted to say, what's the stuff that we're interacting with, we don't see the stuff. We see an image in our mind that is a result of that interaction with that stuff, but we don't see the stuff. If we were a bird, we'd see many more colors than we see now. There are certain other creatures. There's a wonderful book by Ed Yong, Yong, called An Immense World, which talks about the different perceptual worlds of different kinds of beings, beings that can see ultraviolet, electricity, and so on. It's really quite amazing. So what you see is not like out there, actually, right? What you're seeing is within the field of consciousness. Something's causing it. We can certainly say that. It's not like we're just making it all up. But it's not like out there, and I'm in here. So that's a very profound aspect of this third turning of the wheel, that what we have access to only is consciousness. When you hear something, like you could say our most reliable way of determining what's real is perception. Right? Like, oh, is that real? Well, let's see. Oh, yep, there it is. But when I do this, or when you hear the sound, is that like where's that happening? Right? Again, on a kind of simplistic physics version, like, if I don't know if maybe the sound's being deadened by Zoom, but if I snap, but I go, you know, that's what is that? That's sound waves coming out of your speaker, right? Propagated along the air molecules. Is that what you hear? No, you don't hear vibrating air molecules. You hear a sound, just like you don't see photons. So what we have access to in our experience is just experience, right? So that's a very profound aspect of this, means that really our ground of it doesn't mean we're all locked up inside of ourselves. It means exactly the opposite, that we're all like connected, completely interconnected with the world and with each other. So part of what this means then is that when we're in a sense trying to really determine what the nature of reality is, because remember, the cause of suffering is our confusion about the nature of reality. What we're really doing is investigating the nature of experience, because that's what we have access to. And when we examine the nature of experience, what we discover is that the sense that there are objects with fixed identities is false. And the sense that there's a world out there and I'm in here is also false. But that nevertheless, experience is happening. Interdependent experience with all kinds of content, all kinds of stuff happening, right? So to see what's really happening in this case means to see that. To see that there's all of this interdependent world happening, experience happening, without there things fixed in identities, without there this distinction of inside, outside. Now, how does this relate to then the idea of the Buddha nature? I'm going to try in the next 5 minutes to do this. We'll see how it goes. And maybe we can talk about it more later. There are going to be ways of practicing in which the practice is kind of like this. So we did this, remember this gesture? We have this, and we drop. So there's kinds of practice where what we're trying to do is actually not be aware, where our awareness is about objects, but awareness is just about awareness itself. Being aware without fixating on objects. And a key aspect of this idea here that's helping us to understand what the nature of experience itself is the idea that we're always aware of experience itself effortlessly. Like, for example, if I'm going to hold this up again and I'm going to ask you, you see it, right? And now let me ask a question about it. All right. Holding it up. You can see it. Are you conscious? I asked you, you looking at it now, were you conscious when you saw it? How do you know you were conscious? Do you go like, oh, wait a second, could you put it up again? Because I need to look at myself to know I'm conscious. Like, yeah, okay, now I'm going to look inside and make sure I'm conscious. Is that how it works? Or do you know the feeling of being conscious? I don't think anyone here is doubting that they're conscious when they see this. The feeling of being conscious comes with the experience. You don't have to look at your consciousness to know you're conscious. Here's another thing. Okay, ready? You see this? Okay, now take it away. When you saw it, were you sitting down? Or lying down, maybe, whatever position you're in? Do you have to go like, oh, I don't know. I remember sitting down and then I looked at it and I don't remember getting up, so I must have been sitting down? Or is your body position included in the experience of seeing? Or here's one more. When you look at it, okay, ready? We look at it. Boom, boom, boom. Timestamp. 1, 2, 3. Boom. Timestamp. At the timestamp, were you the one looking at it or was it somebody else? Huh? What is he talking about? Right? That sense of you looking, the sense of the knower knowing is there without you having to look into the knower. So these are all ways of describing, these are different ways of trying to help us to see that there's a lot we are aware of without making it into an object. Things like our body position, our sense of being conscious, a sense of being the knower. Like with visual perception, there's a depth of field. Like I see that from over here. This seems to be over there. And I know the here-ness without having to look at it. It's like, am I here? Like, let me check. Am I here? What would happen if you checked if you were here? You'd be here, and the other you would be there, right? That doesn't work too well. So that sense of in-here-ness, of being the knower, and so on, we know all of that. We don't have any doubt about it, but we're not knowing that by making it into objects. Which means that we have a kind of knowing in every moment of experience that is already non-dual. Okay? Just the mere fact of being conscious, the mere sense of being conscious, is already a kind of non-dual awareness. So this is a key way of understanding how even every moment of ordinary experience already has a kind of aspect of Buddha experience, awakened experience, enlightened experience within it. Right? Non-dual awareness is not something we have to produce. It's actually, we're already experiencing it in every moment, but we're so fixated on objects. Why are we fixated on objects? Because we want to get the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff. And why are we doing that? Because we think someone in here needs it, that there is some unchanging real knower, controller, whatever, separate from the world. So we don't even see that this aspect of our experience is happening all the time. Okay, I know that was very that was a lot to handle. Maybe we could talk about it more another time, but I just wanted to because this is our fourth in the foundation series, and I just wanted to be sure we got at least got to that, even if it's a little confusing. But I think if you think about it, and might not be so confusing. In some ways, it's so obvious. Sometimes we say this is so obvious that it's hard to understand, right? It's like such an obvious, just like when I say, "Are you the one seeing it, or is it somebody else?" Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, of course, right? Are you conscious? Like, how do you know you were conscious? Or it's like, what is he talking about? But you know, right? You're sure too, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of out of time, but I could take one or two questions nevertheless. Here we go. I see a question, bit of a loaded one. I saw your first session, and for me, it sometimes seems like Siddhartha ultimately wanted to go back. This is from Benutzer. Wanted to go back to the palace, to go back to a place where there is no suffering. So he built himself a metaphysical one. Is this wish to end suffering not some form of attachment in itself? Why not accept suffering? Uh, well, if you want to suffer, go ahead. I mean, that's kind of the answer to that. Like, yeah, sure, if that's what you want to do, just go ahead and accept suffering and let me know how it goes. Uh, and I'm being a little facetious, obviously, just teasing a little, but I hope you don't mind. But I think that also, I mean, on the other hand, this is an important question. It's like, yes, there is, um, especially for Mahayana, because Mahayana is saying, I mean, both. You could say, well, you're just kind of escaping suffering, and that motivation is, a form of attachment. And then Mahayana is saying, we want to transform the world to not for our own sake, but for the sake of all sentient beings. And actually, the Buddhist philosopher Dharmakirti, who's one of my favorites from the seventh century, he uh, he kind of made a little debate with himself, saying, "Well, isn't that a form of attachment? Like, if you're saying you have great compassion, you want sentient beings to be free of suffering, isn't that a kind of attachment?" And basically, at first, Dharmakirti says, "Well, it's not attachment because it's not imputing qualities that the thing doesn't have. It's not confused." And then the, other person in the debate says, it's still attachment, even if you're not confused. And Dharmakirti says, okay, it's attachment. But here, it's a kind of attachment that, if you want to call it that, what does it mean? It means connectivity. So being connected, so you could say the kind of part of the key to Mahayana is embracing connection, not embracing suffering, but embracing connection, not seeking to escape from, our complicated world. Uh, and the difference between samsara and, building the Buddha field, as we say, is that samsara is driven by the attachment to one's own happiness, whereas building the Buddha field is the main cause of that system, if you like, is the compassion that's concerned about others' happiness. So, but that's a really good question, important and very good question. Thank you for that. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat. You can unmute. We'll go for another 2 or 3 minutes, 3, 4 minutes. Any other questions in the chat?
Hi, John.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you. I have a question about this because in the Western world, when all day we are encouraged to, focus on things and think 1 + 1 is 2, it feels a bit hard to practice this experiencing and to practice this, to not feel like I'm this and everybody else is someone else. How do you practice this, like in a specific practice or like in everyday life?
Um, that's a great question, and I won't be able to give you a good answer now, I don't think. But I'll try a little bit here. So part of I think so one of this is just having a practice time. Will you really, we set up a kind of there's a reason why practice involves setting aside a time, having a way of kind of structuring our practice. Like if we're doing Buddhist practice, we do refuge and so on. We kind of enter into a world that supports the practice we're doing, even if it's just in that 15 minutes or something when we're doing our practice. We want to enter a kind of different world for that practice. And part of what we're doing there is also trying to let go of the need, you know, to sort of set aside our ordinary pursuits and to let go of all that. And part of what that can help with is when we are then involved in the world, that maybe we start to get a little bit of a sense that the the opinions and the views and the fixation that we see even in our own selves and also those around us, that is confused. And we might then be able to, instead of being very reactive to something, we sort of can see, oh, this, we in a way, I'm not doing a great job of this, but in a way, we can sort of take a perspective, like take a step back, not be so fixated, take a step back and say, well, why am I feeling like this right now? What's the model of the world that's driving my fixation? Or I'm working with someone, who's having some challenges. Rather than deciding whether they're right or wrong about their view of the world or something, it's more like just step back and say, well, what is that kind of world that they're living in? Right? To start to develop a kind of flexibility about our worlds, so to speak. That I think is one approach to see that very objectivist, fixated, and I'll call it Western style in modern life, that's just a version, so to speak. Right? And we may have to kind of play that game, but we don't have to think it's reality. So that's my rather incomplete answer for now, but I hope it helps a little bit. Yeah. Alrighty. And of course, I would say one other thing that always helps in those kinds of, is working with the world is really our compassion. Because that's part of what enables us to not get stuck in our own reality and to see how others are creating reality. Alrighty, we're already a few minutes over. If there's no other questions, there's a burning important question. Anybody? All right, I guess we will leave it at that. Thank you very much for this time together. We'll dedicate some merit and then maybe we'll find a time to do like once a month or something, a kind of more open-ended Q&A where we just pose some questions and talk about stuff. So for now, thank you very much, and let's dedicate our merit for our highest aspiration for the relief of the suffering of all sentient beings. Sunam de tanchi zipa ni topne nyebe dranam pamje ne gyegan nachi balak truba yi sibi tsole drowa drowa sho. Okay, thank you.